Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Wellness Foreplay. We are Dr. Dundee and Marcy Nettles. We are your hosts today, and we've got episode 12 to bring to you where we're talking about proactive wellness versus reactive recovery.
It's such a big conversation.
It is.
Oh my gosh, it's so important. So just so you know a little bit about us, I am a former police detective and you are?
I'm a former family wellness chiropractor.
And together we are now doing the investigations that we know we can come up with the knowledge that is the foreplay to your wellness, hoping to empower you to be able to take some different steps, make some different choices to have a better you in the future. So like you said, this is episode 12. We're super excited about that. And do you want to give your little disclaimer really fast?
Yes. So the information you're going to hear from us is not intending to prevent, treat, cure, mitigate, or do anything with any diseases. We are simply here to inform you so that you may be your best health advocate and actually be a participant in your own health rather than just being an observer or leaving it up to someone else's authority. So you can take back your authority, regain your health, and come from and health has multiple dimensions. It's not just physical, which we'll get into on today's episode, but we are simply here to inform you and educate you and let you do with the information what you will.
So what we do with these episodes is we come to you each time with one topic, 4 questions, okay? And we try to answer those 4 questions. Yeah, we try to answer those 4 questions for you. And by the way, foreplay is always better when you do it with someone else.
That is true.
Please go ahead and share this around to all of your friends and family. Anybody that you want to have optimal wellness, this is the show for them, okay? So again, the episode today is episode number 12, and we're going to be talking about wellness, right? Proactive wellness and reactive recovery. So the 4 questions that we have today are, the first one is, what is the difference between proactive and reactive? The second question is, what are the advantages of being proactive? The third question, what are the risks of being reactive? And the 4th question, we're going to kind of leave it as a secret question right now. We're going to wait until we get to that point because we don't want you pondering on it yet. We want to give you the information for the answers for the first 3 questions.
Prepare you to answer the question before we ask the question.
Yeah. So question number 1, back to that. What is the difference between being proactive and reactive? What is that?
You got the definitions.
I do. Oh, and you know what? That's the truth. I actually wanted to give you guys the definitions. Proactive definition is creating or controlling a situation by causing something to happen rather than responding to it after it has happened. Okay.
Yes.
And then the reactive definition is acting in response to a situation rather than creating or controlling it. Okay, that's a really big deal. I mean, I'm sure that many of us can look at our lives and what's going on in them right now. We can think about, okay, so what's going on right now? Is it something that I have any control of? Did I create it? Or is it something I'm just letting happen to me? And so that's really kind of the discussion we're going to be having right now around your wellness. Okay.
Yes.
What's going on there? And so you were thinking there's 3 categories of people.
Yeah. And we'd like to pose this to you is we're going to give you 3 categories of people. Try to identify what category you fit into and whether or not at the end of this episode, whether it might change your mind a little bit. So the first category of people are the ignorance. They just literally don't know what they don't know. Unconscious ignorance. They don't know what they don't know. The second is people that are making a choice. They're making a choice of convenience over quality. And then the third category of people are also making a choice, but they will make a very specific choice to either be proactive. Everything they do is proactive by choice. And there's others that know the benefit of that. They just choose to not care, or they're apathetic. And they're, by that approach, they're choosing not to do those things, even though they know the consequences. They're making a decision not to do the things that are proactive, thus choosing the reactive and being okay with it.
And you know, that's really scary because these choices actually affect every area of our lives. We wrote down a list of some specific areas. You might come up with a different area, but I would bet that it still would affect that area of being a proactive or a reactive person. So the areas that we wrote down was your health, finances, family and relationships. How about your spirituality, your career? How about mental health? And then your overall contribution. These are all areas in your life that making a decision to be proactive or choosing to not be, it's going to make a big difference.
Yeah. And in some cases, a dramatic difference. And all of them, if you look at all the categories that Marcy just mentioned, they all relate to freedom. And the more of the things you are proactive in, the more predictable freedom you will experience, especially here in the United States, where we live in a free country, not so much other places in the world that don't have the luxuries and freedoms that we have. But when you have the ability to be proactive, or by not doing so, you're being reactive, you're actually giving up your freedom. And we'll get into a little bit more specifics on those.
Yeah. So really the answer to that question is being proactive means that you're going out there and you're taking the bull by the horns and you're making the life that you want to live, right?
Yeah.
But being reactive is that you're letting life happen to you. So that's the answer to question number one. And so moving on to question number two, what are the advantages of being proactive? There's so many. Oh my gosh. I mean, including just the quality of your life, right?
And the predictability of your life. The more proactive, because, well, and here's the thing where we may be talking to some ignorant people right now. They're literally not ignorant, meaning you're not educated. Ignorant,
or that you're not smart.
Or that you're not smart. It has nothing to do with your education level, or it's more your education level than it is your intelligence. So it's just, you just didn't know. You were honestly unaware. That is an acceptable pass. And we're hoping to overcome some of those things and alleviate some of those I just didn't know scenarios by giving you some information. And then you can apply some thought and then choose to be proactive or reactive now that you have that education about things.
Yeah, you're really going to be able to eliminate a lot of those life surprises down the road by being proactive, right? Plus, I love the thought that being intentional now with the choices that we make is actually going to give us the opportunity to live later. And you can take that in lots of different ways, because if we're talking about your health, it's literal. It's going to give you the opportunity to continue being on this planet later, right? But how about this? What about your finances? If you're intentional now, just think about the life you'll be able to live for the rest of your life, because you'll have the finances to be able to do it. So in every aspect of your life, being intentional now is going to be able to give you the opportunity to actually really live a full life later.
Good point.
Yeah, I love that. Plus, being intentional just gives you the opportunity to, look, feel, and be better all the way around.
It's kind of you have an option to either be intentional or live by default, meaning just you go make things happen or just let things happen. And that really encompasses most people. And the unfortunate reality, most people let things happen or allow things to happen more than people go out and make things happen. It's interesting. If you just look at some of the most successful people in the world in a business sense, we'll categorize this now as business. Very few of them, the ones that have achieved the top level, have alarm clocks. But most of the unsuccessful people on a business sense have alarm clocks and hit the snooze button repeatedly. The difference is one of them is intentional. They because everything about their life is intentional. They go to bed at a certain time so they can wake up at a certain time without an alarm clock. Most people who live by default or just see what happens, stay up as late as they can and need the alarm clock and think that an extra 9 minutes and then an extra 9 minutes and then an extra 9 minutes is going to make a difference. It's just one example, but something that probably most of us can relate to one way or the other as we find ourselves in one category or the other, or sometimes in the middle.
Yeah. You know what? And guys, I want you to take a pause just this second right now, because this information that we're sharing with you is vital and everybody needs to know about it. So take just that split second it takes to either hit share or to move the podcast forward, whatever platform you're watching on right now or listening, share it forward, because people need to know that they don't just have to let things happen to them. You were talking about expectations and all that kind of stuff. You don't have to let it happen to you. Did you know that you can actually intentionally take ownership of your own wellness at a DNA level? That you don't have to just expect what happened to your mother or your father or your grandfather to happen to you.
Right.
That you can live your life in an intentional way. And the earlier you start, by the way, the better. And you can actually affect the way your DNA expresses itself when it comes to how well you live your life. And that can all be done with food and with positivity and your mindset and your spirituality, all of these different things that you can be intentional about right now, to be able to positively affect change down at the DNA level. That's
We call
how,
that epigenetics.
yes.
Yeah.
And you know what too, is that you can also, yeah. So epigenetics means your environment, right?
Internal and
Everything,
external.
yeah, everything that is going on inside of you and everything that's going on outside of you, you have a choice and a way to change it. Okay. And so if you start early with being intentional and being proactive in your choices and decisions, then you can actually change the outcome. And so you
Yeah.
don't have to depend on what happened in your bloodline before you.
I have an interesting
love that.
story about that. This is something I discovered back in the late 90s when I was in chiropractic college. And I'm just going to give a little historical perspective. Is the AIDS virus. The AIDS virus has many downsides. Most of it is downside, but there's a positive to the AIDS virus. And I don't mean from the negative side of people dying. I mean, from what we've learned from people dying. And here's an example about epigenetics. And I remember reading a study that when AIDS went through and literally decimated Africa, there was thousands of identical twin orphans. And here's the thing about identical twins. Identical twins started out as one sperm, one egg, came together, formed one person, and then that egg divided and became two people, but from the same starting point, versus fraternal twins, two sperm, two egg, two different people. This is the interesting thing about genetics, is when you have one person that divides and becomes two identical twins, they have the same DNA. And because of having the same DNA, one would expect prior to the 80s and 90s that they would have the same quality of life. Well, here's something we learned because of the AIDS virus. They were orphans and they were adopted. In this one case, there was these two identical twin brothers that were adopted to two different families in two different parts of the world, one here in the United States and one in France. And they found these children in this retrospective research study 20 years after they were adopted. And they followed up on them and introduced them to each other. And they spoke different languages, they ate different food, they were brought up in different families. And as a result, they looked and felt and lived a different. One of them had male pattern baldness at 20. The other, and was obese, high cholesterol, already getting into pre-diabetic situation. And the other 20-year-old was thin, perfect head of hair, and a triathlete. Genetically identical. The difference was the family they were being raised in, the food that they ate, the exercise that they did or didn't do, the positivity that went into them from a nurturing standpoint, optimistic versus pessimistic. You can be whatever you want to be, or this is what you're going to look like. And this is the thing. The interesting thing about how they looked appearance-wise, they were both adopted. They looked like their families that they were adopted into. The French family was very lean, very athletic, very successful in many different aspects of life. And the American family, and this has nothing to do with US versus France, but the family, most of them were obese. Most of them suffered with debilitating and terminal diseases, and they didn't have a very good lifestyle. So that's what we learned about epigenetics. Two identically, exactly the same human beings in just a short 2 decades were living a very different quality of life. And that's when science learned that it's not so many. Yeah, there is a genetic component to certain things, but it's less than 5%. 95% of our outcome of our life is how we live our life. And that was very interesting. And what the AIDS virus gave us the ability to understand and know this now and put it into our lives the way we live.
Wow, that's amazing. And that's like a perfect lead into the last part of the answer to this question, number 2. So is there a way that we can change things in our life in those 7 different areas just by doing one thing? Just one thing. I mean, there's many different things, but we don't want to completely overwhelm you.
Yeah.
But just one thing in each one of these 7 areas that we mentioned earlier that can completely change your wellness factor.
From a proactive standpoint, right?
Yeah, and that's a proactive way of thinking about it. And it's also, an all-encompassing your whole life, not just talking about the physicality of your body. We're talking about your whole life. So one thing in your health aspect, though, that you could do is
exercise.
Get your body moving, right? And then how about your finances? What's one thing that you could do there?
This is something that's usually taught or not taught. Pay yourself first. With the money that you get. If you're a tither, go ahead and pay the church first. If you're not a tither, or you are, make sure to pay yourself something. every single pay period and
Mhm.
let that accumulate, let that compound, let that collect
Mhm.
interest. But one financial decision, pay yourself as well.
Yeah, yeah. So absolutely tithe first, and then pay yourself 10% if you can,
Mhm.
and if you can't, take it back to 5%. If you can't do 5%, do 2%. Just
Something
do something.
consistently.
Pay yourself first. So how about spirituality? What's one thing that you can do to be proactive in your wellness there?
I'm going to go with MC Hammer. That's why we pray.
And we pray a lot.
Mhm.
We got to be praying all the time, right? And that'll totally be boosting that
Mhm.
spirituality wellness. How about with family and relationships?
Oh my gosh.
Mm,
This is
I have an idea.
Tell me.
Let's play. Let's play more. We need to play more.
Yes.
We need to put a focus on play.
Because all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
It actually makes Jack a jerk.
Yeah, that too.
Just saying.
Yeah,
it's the truth.
absolutely.
It really does. You got to have play
Gotta
in
have
your
fun.
life.
Take the time. Make the time.
Yeah. And then how about in your career? What's one thing that you can do?
This is something, do your best.
Mhm.
If there's a phenomenal book, I'm going to take a quick tangent. There's a phenomenal book called The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. And he talks about when you have a finite based approaches, you're going to win regardless. The whole purpose is to win. And by winning, you beat the other person. In an infinite game, the whole purpose is to keep playing the game. Nobody wins, or you just make the game beneficial for you. And so in that case, do your best. Do your best as an employee, because even in both scenarios, it will be beneficial for you. But most people in an infinite or in a finite game, they're always looking around and they're always, did they do something wrong? Did they do something wrong? They're not focusing on quality of their job. They're just focusing on keeping their job. And that unfortunately has become very prevalent. So in a career sense, do your best.
Yeah. You know what? Even if you hate what you're doing, go in with the mindset and the positivity that I am going to be the best me that I can be. And I'm going to bring and do what I'm supposed to do. Even if I've been put into a box of what I'm allowed to do, because what will happen is that you'll either start to like what you're doing, if it's where you're supposed to be, or someone's going to notice and you'll have a different opportunity come your way. So just always
think
do
about
your
it,
best.
the environment, cubicles and job descriptions. We get shackled to or handcuffed to our cubicle and our job description. But if we thought outside altruistically, what's best for the company, do your best thinking about what's best for the company, and you'll rise in any scenario, whether it's a finite game approach or an infinite game approach. But most people don't do that.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer this next one for your mental health. One thing that you can do, and we're not even going to talk about it. I'm just going to say it. Turn off your damn TV.
Yep.
There's nothing but junk there. So It's a waste of your time. And then contribution, the final area that we're talking about today.
One act of random kindness every single day. Doesn't cost you anything other than a thought of what to do and actually taking the action to do it. It will enrich you like very few things, because it doesn't cost any money. It just costs some effort and some thinking about and some forethought. Do something to bless somebody else just because you can. And
by the way, guys, the ripple effect. That's truly a way that you can have an impact on the world.
Measure the results in smiles.
Acts of random kindness. Do it. All right. So let's move on to question number 3. So what are the risks of being reactive? Oh my gosh, this is like the scariest one, right?
Living a life that's unpredictable.
Yeah, it really is. And you're just waiting. You're just waiting for whatever's going to happen. And so we want to have more control in our lives. And that's why we're doing this show, is so that you can feel empowered and have the tools that you need, the knowledge that you need, that we know is the foreplay to your wellness. Yeah. And so it really leaves you into a situation to where when you're being proactive, you're being intentional, right? So that you can live your life the way that you want to. Well, being reactive is actually the mindset of, I'm going to play now and pay later. Baby, you're going to pay later big time, because there's consequences to everything, right? And so living a reactive lifestyle is really a lifestyle of anxiety. Because you don't have any control and you don't know what's going to happen next in any aspect of your life. So you were telling me about the 7s, that, the thing about the way that we live our life when we're reactive and we aren't really paying attention is, and one thing I learned, with my mom died when she was only 54 years old, and she died from cancer that started in her colon that moved to her liver. And we learned that cancer had been growing for at least 7 years inside of her body before the symptoms came out and before she could start being, but it was all because she had her head in the sand. She was taking care of everybody else, but she wasn't taking care of herself. So that's a perfect example of having a reactive, even though she tried to eat well, there was, she didn't take care of herself. So
and that's why one variable isn't the answer. Eating well is one thing, but it's one part of the puzzle.
Yeah. Yeah.
But regard to cancer, it's interesting, and maybe most people don't know this, but by the time you feel a lump or you have a dimple in your skin or a mark that just isn't going away or pain somewhere, and it ends up being some type of cancer, by the time the diagnosis comes, that underlying cancer on average had been developing for about 7 years with no knowledge by you that it was there. So it's not what you feel sometimes, it's what you don't feel that can be the most lethal, especially when it can become so gradual and start with 7 years prior is when the process started. The question is, and there's all these other variables, being proactive is minimizing your likelihood for a crisis in any one of the areas that we mentioned previously.
Yeah. And so I mentioned that there's consequences in everything, right?
Always.
And so in those 7 different areas, we went through and we were just thinking about what could be just one of the consequences if you're being reactive in all of those 7 different areas. And so in the first area in health, that's obvious.
Yeah.
That's disease, right? That means that you're going to be sick if you're reactive. How about in your finances?
Being broke or being in lack.
Living in poverty. Yeah. Yeah. How about spirituality? This is such a big one because if you don't have this one thing, really, it's hard to have abundance in any of your lives. And that's, hopelessness.
And usually based on prolonged tormenting. Or feeling tormented or being tormented by your thoughts or by the spiritual nature of hopelessness is a very, very dark place, as a lot of people are understanding that right now more than ever.
Yeah. And then in family and relationships, if you're not being proactive and you're just reactive to whatever's happening or you're not present, being estranged from family members, whether it's your children, which is really hard, your siblings, family, how about spouse, going through a divorce, estrangement, separation, it all happens when you are being reactive in your relationships instead of being focused and intentional, proactive.
And part of that is with regard to relationships is looking at self versus altruistic, thinking about the other person. And that's one of the greatest lessons I've learned in relationships is when I focus on myself, I get pretty stingy and I get selfish, and it's harder. It makes the predictability of having problems in the relationship much more predictable versus like in our marriage, for example, when I focus on her, we have less problems in our marriage.
Happy wife, happy life, right?
Yes, I'm making a conscious decision to be proactive and nurturing you rather than worrying about myself.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then how about in your career? When you are reactive, more than likely, you are going to end up somewhere that you hate being.
Yeah.
Right. And so all these are reasons why we want to be proactive, right? And then how about
75 to 80% of people polled hate their job.
Yeah. And that
hate their job. Not just like hate their job. I remember when I was growing up, my mom would always say, when I would say I would hate something, my mom would say, no, you don't hate, you dislike. Hate is not a good word. And she was correct. It is not a good word. But the reality is 75 to 80% of the working public hate their job.
Yeah. And what's really sad about that is that you actually spend more of your hours, your waking hours at your job than you do with your family.
Yeah.
So if you hate it,
do
you really, and do you think that your attitude from being somewhere that you hate for so long doesn't bleed over into your family and your relationships? Absolutely it does. But these are all results of being reactive. So are we ready to unveil the fourth question? Yeah. So guys, we did this a little bit different this time because we wanted to give you something to kind of chew on before the next episode, but also to have the information to really be able to think about. It's like, okay, so am I being proactive? Am I being reactive? And do I want to maybe make some changes in these different areas in my life so that I can have more overall wellness? So question number 4 is, now that you know the benefits of being proactive and the risks of being reactive, which approach to life makes the most sense? What do you think? I mean, because we can tell you all day long that we know that being proactive in your life is most definitely the best way to live your life. It's the best way to know that when you're standing on that last moment of your life and you're looking back, that you can have all of the joy and the memories and know that you lived your life the best way that you can, instead of being there on your deathbed and looking back and having the regrets of the things that you would have done, the things that you wish that you would have done, that you didn't do, because that's the number one regret that most people have.
Most people on their deathbed, and this was posed by hospice nurses, or this statistics gathered from hospice nurses, is that most people on their deathbed regret the things they didn't do rather than regretting the things they did do. So it's the missed opportunities, the things they wish they would have done that they didn't do, that they're taking to their grave with them, because they were either reactive out of fear or ignorant, or they literally didn't know what they didn't know, or they were deliberately making a choice not to do it for whatever reason. And there's two examples that pop into my mind. One was a patient. His name was Joe, and don't need to mention his last name because it wouldn't matter anyway. I couldn't even remember it. But it was the first time that I ever had a patient say, I don't care what you say. I don't care what you tell me. I'm not changing my life one bit. And my first question to him was, well, then why are you here? You came here voluntarily. I didn't drag you here. And he said, I came here for my granddaughter. She wanted him to get better. And so he was doing it for her. And even that wore out. After about 2 weeks, he says, I'm not even doing it for her. And he literally walked out of my office. And I was shocked, because thank God it's a very unique situation and not common. But then I remember when Snapple came out back in the 90s or whenever it did, I went into this liquor store to buy a Snapple. And the guy ahead of me was buying cigarettes. And he told the guy behind the counter to make sure to get the cigarettes that had the warning of low birth weight, not the ones that cause lung cancer. And I remember thinking, I was caught off guard. The guy behind the counter goes, are you serious? And he goes, yeah, I can't have a kid, so I want to smoke those. I don't want to get lung cancer. And I thought, and he was serious. And that's when I thought, oh my gosh, he literally doesn't know what he doesn't know. And as he walked out, the guy behind the counter and I had a laugh, but it was like, he was asking a serious question. And it was interesting, the choice he made, but it's sometimes we make a deliberate decision knowing there's consequences. And other times we try to skirt or get around it or tell ourselves a different story, but it's reality. Most people don't fit either one of those categories, but they're out there. And we're hoping that now you are more equipped to make a better decision for you when it comes to the rest of your life and the influence you have on other people that are going to survive after you.
Well, and that's why we do this, right? That's why we do this, is because we are trying to gather the information that we know is the foreplay to your wellness, to be able to give you the knowledge that you need to have the optimal wellness that we know that you want to have, guys, to empower you. So we just challenge you, go through, see if you're willing to do those 7 things that we mentioned. And remember that you can go and see all of the episodes that we've done at dondiandmarcy.com. You can also comment there, connect with us, and let us know your ideas for future episodes, as well as if you're interested in knowing what we're doing proactively in our lives on a daily basis in all these different areas. We would love to be able to share with you. We've got some great regimens that we can share with you in all these different areas. Was there something else that you
I was just trying to figure out a way to properly close this. And I was going to give you part of Romans 12:2 out of the Bible. And it says, do not be conformed by this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And it goes on to say other things, but renew your mind and transform your situation, even if you're starting in a reactive mode. Even if bad news from a doctor or bad news from your banker or bad news from the lender or whatever came your way, and now you're forcing yourself to be reactive or you're finding yourself in a reactive position, it doesn't mean you can't change from that moment forward and take a more proactive approach in all your areas of life. But it starts with not being conformed by what you see, but being transformed by renewing your mind and asking yourselves better questions, like the last one we asked. Knowing the benefits of proactivity and knowing the risks of reactivity, which one makes the most sense to you as it relates to the totality of your life?
Yeah, so good.
And the legacy you leave.
All right, guys. Well, this was episode 12 of your Wellness Foreplay Show. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to bringing you more of the awesomeness that is the foreplay to your wellness. All right, guys.
If you got value in this, please share.
Absolutely.
Take care, everybody. God bless.